episode is here, my friends. Episode 6 of The Acolyte. And this one, we're back to the two titles again, Teach/Corrupt. And I think it's because the twins are separated instead of being together day and night. Those single worded episode titles. Now we're back to the doubles. So we are here. I am Vactor. I'm here with two of my favorite pals to talk all kinds of things with, but especially Star Wars. Let's start off with friend of the show, Shoff. How are you doing today, Shoff?
Hey, I'm doing good. Doing real good.
Excellent.
Real good.
And I have been a guest many times on the Fused Film podcast, but this is Mr. Coll's first time here. Kevin Coll, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm awesome.
He's here. Kevin Coll, the man, the myth, the legend behind FusedFilm.com. Like I said, I've been a guest many times, so if you like my bantering, go check out Fused Film. We'll have links in the show notes. But I wanted to get Kevin on because we have a bunch of Star Wars conversations in text. So I wanted to bring those over to YouTube and to all the fans here. We have a great episode to talk about today. This episode, I wanted to say, was directed by Hanelle Culpepper. And she's also going to be directing the finale of this show, which is episode 8. So I think a lot of things are going to be tying in. But I was looking up her credits. She's an accomplished television director. She's done work on 90210, Parenthood, Criminal Minds, Revenge, Grimm, but also Star Trek Discovery, well as the opening 3 episodes of Picard. So she's got a long Trek history. And I think that is going to lead into some great Trek conversations that we're going to have here today. But I actually wanted to start off the show with asking Kevin a question, because on the Fused Film podcast, we reviewed episode 1 and 2 of The Acolyte. And one of the very first things Kevin said was, why should I care about these characters? Because we were just kind of thrown in. We didn't know who anyone was, besides, if you were a High Republic fan, Vernestra Rwoh. That was the only returning legacy character. Now, Kevin, fast forward 6 episodes. At episode 6, how are you feeling about caring about the characters? Have they done a good job of hooking you in? That's what I'm interested to know.
Short answer is yes. Especially the character of Soul, who I felt like was the most well-rounded in the first 2 episodes. He continues to be somebody that is evolving as the storyline goes. I actually had this in my notes because I watched the first 2 episodes last night after episode 6, and I wanted to go back and see what kind of guy was he. And we see him in the white robes, and he's teaching the Padawans, and he's just this very compassionate, caring teacher. And when he reunites with Osha for the first time, he even makes the comment that he's made peace with what happened on Bryndock. And at the time, we didn't know what he was talking about. We were sort of like, okay, well, we'll probably catch up to that at some point. Now we've seen the flashback episode, at least from a certain perspective. But when you see him in episode 6, he's coming out of this like horrible like battle. His friends are dead. His Padawan's dead. Come in contact with this stranger who may or may not be a Sith. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit. I feel like I care a lot about Saul at this point and where he's at in his character journey. I also care about Osha and May a lot more than I did, especially now that they've kind of flip-flopped where they're at in terms of uniforms and who they're interacting with. You know, you've got Osha in this episode interacting with Kamir, the stranger, and you've got May interacting with Soul. And there's just a lot of development that's happened. So yes, short answer is I do really care about these characters. I don't care about Vernestra as much because she's been like what I would call a C player type character, even a B player. Og, who is this guy? I don't really care about him either.
Dopey haircut.
We got introduced to her as Soul's Padawan, and her relationship with Osha, and how they were these 2 Padawans of Soul that were kind of bonding. Now she's gone, and so yeah, your question is a great question to kick off, because I do think there has been some really good character development up to this point, and now it's like I kind of want to see what's going to happen here in these last 2 episodes. And I'm glad and I'm going to be quiet here in a minute. I'm glad that you referenced the title Teach and Corrupt. Still, having seen the episode now twice, asking myself who's teaching who and who's corrupting who.
Yes,
Something that I watched
yes.
the episode as a question of, is Soul being corrupted by May side potentially? Because there seems to be something that has happened, whether it's the Brendock thing or a combination of that, maybe some other event in his life that is coming to the surface right now. He is a tortured soul, intended but pun intended.
Yeah.
And then you see Khmer, the
Yes.
stranger, over there giving wisdom, so to speak, to and I just think that the title was very well chosen by the writers and the creative team for this episode.
Shoff, what are you thinking about the characters at this point? We've got 2 episodes left, and they've got to wrap up a lot of things, especially what's the other side of that Brendock incident. And Saul keeps getting cut off when he's like, "Okay, I'm going to tell you now."
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to tell you
It's
now.
a lot of shows, like the Chicago shows where it's like PD or a Chicago Fire, wherever they're about to like have like a dramatic moment and have that conversation, like a relational situation. The drill goes off, or like the alarm goes, we gotta go arrest this person. We'll have this conversation later.
Right.
Honestly, I love it. And I'm glad you brought up Soul, because Master Soul is absolutely the heart of the show. There is so much to enjoy and respect about him as an actor and what he's portraying. But then to know that he had to learn English to play this part, and he did it in like 4 months or something like that, like ridiculous. And he has such a profound gravitas, like you are compelled by what he does in his performance, so I really feel for him as a character and as a person, and I feel like he's the most fleshed out. And even when he's not speaking, there's just a lot of inner turmoil that you can really sense, and I don't get that kind of acting prowess from Amandla Steinberg. I don't love her portrayal of May. I think it's very one-dimensional. Osha is a little bit better, but I think it's easier to play like a more, I guess if you're going to compare the two of them, a happier version of it, right? Like compared to May, who's just soul bent on revenge or whatever. Like she's very one note. And so I don't find her character very interesting. Chimere, however we pronounce it, like that's another super interesting character, and I'm really, really intrigued by what Manny Jacinto has done with it. He's made people really, really enjoy the dark side a lot.
It's really a tie between him and Soul in terms of the two actors.
Totally.
Just their quality right now on the series for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as like the titles go, we were talking about Teach Corrupt. I'm actually of the camp that thinks that it's maybe not so much a division of, on this side, like the A storyline and the B storyline, like one person's being taught to, one person is being corrupted. I think it's the very act of teaching is a corruption.
Ooh. Okay.
So, because whether it's the Jedi teaching, that is corrupting the Padawan's mind of the doctrine that is what the Jedi believe, versus on the Sith side or whatever Chimere is. He's definitely a dark side wielder at the very least. There is a doctrine within that, and even if it's just the message of to be free to use his power and wield it however he wants to, that in itself is a lesson and a corruption. And I think that on both sides of the fence, whether you're with Soul and May or with Chimere and Osha, there's corruption happening. And I think what this show is really doing a great job of, and we've seen it through these past 6 episodes, is portraying the Jedi as not being the all good entities that we have seen. We've always seen it from the perspective of the light side is the good side and the dark side is the bad side. And it's not that simple here. And I love that we're operating in the gray, because that to me is much more realistic. Everybody's got a dark corner to their soul that they maybe don't show, but it's a part of them, right? So so I love that this show is kind of taking it there, that we're all capable. We all have the dark side.
Not to get into the sort of toxic fandom outside of all the show, but I'm curious, based on what you just said, Shoff, do you feel like the gray area that this show plays in is what's really driving the toxic fandom, that these traditional hardcore fans don't like seeing Jedi being flawed, sort of in the gray type characters making questionable decisions, that there is a potential darkness there, maybe subversion of things going on. Do you feel like that's really, if we had to isolate the truth down to what's really pissing all these fans off, do you think that that's really what it is?
I think that's part of it, because I think that storytelling, I think what people are used to, especially in Star Wars, is relying on archetypes. And I think characters are brought into storylines that represent the various archetypes that are synonymous with what any story would have. But I think when you operate in the gray, it's not so clear cut. There's not just the one wise man or the one hero or the one it's far more layered than that. And I just think that complexity is more than what people are used to witnessing from this this first from Star Wars. And so they're just not, they're not grabbing to it. It's not like they're not latching on to it. And I think that's their own bad, because it's good. It's a good show. Overall, it's a good show. Is it the best Star Wars show? No, it's not. Is it a good show? Yeah, it's a good show. It's an enjoyable show, and I'm intrigued to see where it goes. I think that if anything, they should have had longer episodes, and or a longer season, because I think that ultimately the story they've told so far in 6 episodes really should have been 4 episodes, and I think that they've got more to tell. Like to me, it feels like they're going to be rushing in these final 2 to have any kind of resolution.
But it's likely they won't answer all the questions that we'll probably have either, given that they are 35 minute episodes and there's only 2 left. So if you think about it, we only have an hour left of content across the bottom 2 episodes. So I'm with you. That is, and Justin's heard it from me on my show. Like I've said it from day one. The crime of this entire series has been the 30-minute episode airtime, be either 60 minutes and I hadn't thought about it or do 12 episodes or do 15 or something like that. So
I wonder if Leslie Headland, I saw an interview talking about she wanted to go 3 or 4 seasons, but she was saying for sure this episode or this season is going to wrap up the mystery. She said it's going to end in a satisfactory way. I wonder if she was kind of hearing that also from fans, like they weren't confident that this season was going to wrap up, and so she wanted to get ahead of that and say, hey, just to calm you guys, calm your fears, it does end. I wrote it specifically and I made sure that everything wraps up. I wonder if that's her coming out and trying to get ahead of it. Shoff brought up a great point, which I was thinking about also, Kevin. I'm interested for your thoughts. You and I have, like, we've known each other since, I think, right after the prequels came out, and we were existing in that Star Wars period. I think actually we went to the Clone Wars movie together in 2007, and so that's when we started to know each other. I'm curious, do you have that same kind of, it has to be black and white, it has to be good and evil, Jedi and Sith, or do you like this more nuanced approach of the shades of gray that we're getting with this episode? And remember, with Ahsoka, we had Baylan Skoll, and he was kind of like, hey, we don't know where he's at. Do you like that form better, or do you like the more traditional Star Wars?
Why can't I just give an answer where it's I like both? I think the if I have to pick, I think you like stories about characters. To me, a story starts with who are these people and what is the end game here and what are they going through. That dictates the story. Everything is then built around it. But that's the foundation of the house. But in retrospect, I enjoy both types of storytelling, and they fill a need of mine as a person. There's times where I just want pure escapism and I'm not really invested in the characters, and I just like the enjoyment of the action and or the things that are happening. Like, Solo got a lot of criticism when it came out because it really truly is that. It's just an escapist story that doesn't, there's a lot of good things and a lot of really bad things about it. But then there's Rogue One, and it does a really good job of having honestly, the balance and the force. It has a lot of both. To kind of answer the question a different way, outside of like the fandom things that I enjoy, like Star Trek, Star Wars, Marvel, DC, I'm a huge fan of the Yellowstone universe. So you think of that show Yellowstone, 1883, and then most recently 1923. And that is a series that is rooted in interesting characters in this family. Like I love that. And that's storytelling that I'm really intrigued by. And so when you see stuff like that come into Star Wars, I'm very like excited about that, because again, it's not more of the same, different. And so I do prefer that, especially moving forward. And if you're going to do a series, and I mean, just not to derail over to Marvel, but I felt like WandaVision was a phenomenal, character driven story. It wasn't just trying to be a sitcom, ode to sitcoms and things like that. That certainly was some of the fabric and DNA of that series, but it was about grief. It was all about grief. And so I feel like, when I think about Acolyte, if I had to give it a sort of one sentence, what is this show about? To me, series feels like it's about, I think you kind of said it, Shoff, to kind of use your words. It is about
Duality.
that duality. It's about, we're all being taught something, and we're either corrupted by it or we use it as ways to grow. And there's duality there. So I think this show, where it's going with Kymir's character, the stranger, he has no name, as he says, to actually start to put some character development around a villain, I think is really, really compelling, because the villain is the hero of their own story. Go back to Infinity War. I mean, Thanos is going through his hero's journey in that story, and the Avengers are the villains, and he wins at the end. Still won even after Endgame. He technically still won. A different Thanos from a different time lost. But anyway, railing here. So yeah, I do prefer that gray storytelling. I just think it's more interesting. Now, if it was a blockbuster movie and you got 2 hours of somebody eating popcorn in the theater and you have to have different kinds of pacing, I think there's a balance there that you have to have. I'm not saying you need to go full Rise of Skywalker, but I'm not saying you need to go, the Dark Knight either. There's balance that you got to have in the Force.
Yeah, that's I think the whole crux of this show, I agree with both of you, is the duality, the acolyte with the two O's, the twins, the yin yang, all of that stuff. And Leslie Headland coming out before the show came out and saying, I want to explore this from the Sith point of view and from the dark side and from the other, not the Jedi's perspective. I think that has been the most interesting thing to me. And seeing May and Osha and the witches talking about, they had that line of, it's not about good or evil. It's not about that. It's about power and who can control it and who can wield it. And that's what Kymir is talking about, where he's like, I just want to be free. I just want to do what I want to do without you telling me. And I like that aspect of it, the way that they're analyzing that, and him talking to him, corrupting or teaching, depending on the way you're looking at it, her, Osha, where he's like, what's the difference between if you killed me now in the pool versus a couple hours later on the battlefield? Where, it's all about your perspective, the way you look at it. And then also the thing he said in the last episode about rules. And when he's like, hey, if you don't follow the rules, you'll never break them. Like, it's just the perspective that you're looking at it. And I find that to be fascinating. Not to say I agree with him or think that you should be giving into all your hateful feelings and the dark side feelings, which again, he also talked about in this episode where he's like, it's the way you look at the Force. He's like, the way you access it, that's what they told you. The only way to access it is through the Jedi means being patient and all these things. But if you access this deeper emotion, this other level of emotions that you have, which some call the dark side, semantics, whatever. He's like, this is another way to do it. And it's not like the dark side is the boogeyman and everything. The Yoda speech about it, a forever it'll haunt you, or you'll forever go down that path and you'll never get out of it, which we saw with Anakin is not really true. He was able to kind of get out at the end. So I love all of these things that this show is bringing up, and this discussion that we're having has been so fun for me week to week. And I just don't understand the hatred of saying, "Oh, this show's terrible, dumpster fire, garbage, trash." And it's like, there's so much great stuff here. Now, is everything great? No, this is not. To me, I think Andor is the gold standard. I've said that many times. I think Andor is the one that everything should be shooting for. But you compare this to Ahsoka, I think this is way better than what Ahsoka was, or Book of Boba Fett.
They could not release a single episode and it would be better than Book of Boba Fett.
Except for the Mando episodes of Book of Boba Fett, which was like Mando season 2.5. That was like the best when that came in. But I think the way that this show is kind of dancing around these things and showing different perspectives and stuff, this is needed in Star Wars. This is something that we can get a different take on it, a different side of it. I think at this point I realized when I was watching this episode 6, I went from I like this show to I love this show now. I'm all these things that we're talking about week to week and filtering it through the lens of Star Wars and then our own personal things. I'm in love with this show now. I think Acolyte is one of my favorite shows that's on TV right now. And it's because they've had a time to build to that point. It wasn't straight out of the gate, first episode, 5 out of 5, best thing ever. It took a while to get there. So I'm really enjoying all of these things.
I want like an entire series just about him, like events of the Acolyte. Like that's kind of what I'm like most interested in seeing next. Like, where do you go from here? If that was going to be a question later. Like, I'm very interested in him, his story, and like what led him to this point, and his philosophy and stuff. Because you said it earlier, like to me, the best type of entertainment, whether it's TV or movies, meets our world today in terms of the commentaries that we have, whether it's political divisiveness, religious, differences. You ever sit in a room and listen to a Christian apologetics person debate with a atheist? It's one of the most fascinating conversations you could ever witness. And I feel like we're kind of seeing that with Khmer and Sol. You have the Jedi, which are these essentially the Catholics of the the galaxy far, far away, and they're expanded and expansive. And then you have these different force users that are out there, people who interpret the force differently, whether it's pulling the thread. There's witches, you've got the Night Sisters. There's even different types of witches. I mean, Filoni's come out and said that he worked with Leslie Headland on this. Like, why do they have to be the Witch Sisters? Couldn't there be different witches that were in existence at that time? It's one of those things where I love when things mirror our own world. It makes that much more fascinating to watch and to get interested in.
Yeah. I with what Kevin was saying regarding wanting to see his backstory, Chimer's backstory, I think we're going to get a glimpse of it, because one thing we see in this episode is we see the scars on his back, and Osha she essentially is like, is that from your master? Did your master do it? And we've got Vernestra Rwoh in the background here with a whip lightsaber, and she's not just for the background, right? Like, she's got more to do. She understands the idea of tipping the scales. That is a Sith term. I fully believe that she was his master.
That makes 100% sense, because the scar is curved and it kind of looks like it was from a whip. And then, so that leads to, okay, what if she was the master and he quote unquote threw him away? What caused that to happen?
Yeah.
I'm curious to see this next episode and to get more backstory on all these things. And that's another thing is, we're talking about this week to week, and I see so many comments where people are like judging this entire series off of one episode, and it breaks the canon, it breaks the lore. And it's like, we don't even have the full picture yet. We haven't even seen the whole series or this whole season. So how can you say, they said Sith, so that means it breaks episode 1 when they said Sith hadn't been seen for 1,000 years. And it's like, wait a minute, nothing that's happened in this show has broken any lore or canon up to this point. Now they could, and okay, at that point when that happens, maybe you have an argument, but to judge it based off of these episodes, I just don't get it. I think just people are already wanting to hate the show. That was why they had all the review bombings and the things coming out even before the first trailer. I remember people saying, "Oh, the show's going to be bad." And it's like, well, how about you give it a chance and watch the first episode?
This
So
reference it's a fascinating one because that line from Ki-Adi Mundi in the prequel trilogy is very specific. The Sith have not been seen in a millennia. Seen. The object of actually seeing something like live in front of you.
Right.
And you hear throughout this Acolyte series, once we know Chimere is the stranger and the holding the red lightsabers, he responds to Soul in saying, "You might call me a Sith." He didn't confirm he was. He didn't actually say, "Yeah, I'm a Sith," and all this. He's just saying, "I'm looking for a pupil, and you might call me a Sith," because that's what the Jedi would default to typically if there's anything.
Right, almost like it's a slur,
And so I feel like there's no definitive confirmation yet that like he is a Sith. Number two, it's like I don't think they've broken any canon either, just based on the rhetoric that was used in the prequel. And I firmly hope at least that Pablo Hidalgo on the story team, Filoni, all the people that are involved in making these things happen, like they thought about this before they just threw something out there. And that's where the toxic fandom wants you to believe that they didn't think about it. And, because a writer in the writers team that had never seen Star Wars before. But if you actually read Leslie Headland's interviews about that, she felt like it was important to have a person in the room that was not going to be jaded by the fandom and have all that love that they would bring into the story, that they needed to have somebody that just was there to make sure the beats, the structure, the character development, all of those things were in place to make sure that it was a good story beyond the fact that it was a Star Wars thing. So because Headland herself is a self-proclaimed fan.
That's what I don't get, because I've had so many comments on my YouTube, my Instagram. They don't care about us. They don't care about the lore. They being the showrunners, the creative forces behind this, and the actors included. And I've seen so many things about Leslie Headland talking about how she loved Knights of the Old Republic, loved all the lore or the Legends books and all these things. And she's trying to bring Legends stuff into this, like Cortosis, which we saw in the last episode. And he actually said it in this episode. He said the word Cortosis. And I just don't get, I'm sorry, I do get it. People are just, they want to think what they want to think. They want blinders on, and they want to say, well, I had this opinion and you're not going to change my mind. And it's like, well, if you actually looked at the interviews, if you actually looked at all these things, they are big fans. Like I posted a thing on my YouTube of Amanda Stenberg dressing as Padme for a Star Wars convention. And it's like, look, she's a fan. She likes Star Wars. She liked the prequels. And people were responding, not my Padme. And I was like, what are you talking about? She's a fan, and she's talking about like she's liking the thing that you like. So why are you upset about her dressing as Padme?
Have you heard of cosplay?
I was like, I just don't get that. So yeah, Kevin, that's a great point. Leslie Headland, I think she has shown that she is a fan, and I think the story that she's telling from her perspective, and she is a lesbian in real life. These are things that she's not trying to convert you, and she's not trying to bring up, because that's another thing is people are like, oh, they're bringing politics into this and all this stuff.
I think they converted a lot of people though after
this episode. This was
Chimere in the pool. I think a lot of formerly straight Star Wars fans are
my timeline
feeling very conflicted.
My Threads timeline was nothing but shots of him in the pool and talking about Chimere.
I thought we were going to get our first
but that had to be fully naked, or is he going to have like a little loincloth on or something? But then when he fully dresses down, and then I was like, no, they're not going to show that. This is Disney.
Yeah, they did not show his dark side.
They didn't show his little Manny, but we saw Osha got to see it, and she was staring at it.
Yeah, she was
a corrupt element of the title of the show. I feel like there was some seduction there that was very influenced by his character. 100%. And again, going back to a Leslie Headland interview where she talks about going back to the original trilogy and Obi-Wan describing Anakin's fall to the dark side as Anakin was seduced by the dark side of the Force. That
Ooh,
that
I like that. That was
seduced
good.
is a very, core element of what the Sith do. And when you go watch the prequel trilogy, just that situation where Palpatine is sitting there talking about, I help you save the ones you love, like there's a lot of seduction that happens politically as well as through his relationship. So there is an element there that I think is using sexuality, using Manny Jacinto's physical being as a way to seduce Osha. We don't know what these people's sexual preference are. I don't really care. Me is irrelevant, but it's one of those things where you have a good looking dude in a pool who's using that to his advantage, and I think that's an important element of the show. And I'm excited that Star Wars is showing that, because as much as I love the prequels and the original trilogy, there's some of that there too. People don't give the Leia and the slave bikini enough credit. There was a lot of seduction there. I mean, I would have turned to the dark side for sure. But anyway, I'm getting off the rails here. I don't want to be insensitive. So
Yeah, I just thought there was such a deliberate nature of him seducing her, and also he being stripped down, disarming her. That was another thing of there's that whole the test of you need to kill Jedi without a weapon, which I don't know if we're actually ever going to get the reasoning behind that, because I talked about this on another podcast where I was like, what is the point of that? Why do you have to kill a Jedi without a weapon? I would love to hear about, from Kevin, if we had a whole side show or something with him, I'd love to hear about that. But in this show, I don't know if we actually get the answer to that. But this scene, I felt like he was disarming her, because she's like, oh, he has no weapon. He has nothing on him. He's completely naked. I have the lightsaber. And so he was using that, as well as him saying, hey, doesn't it feel good? And I know Shoff's mind went somewhere else, but he was like, doesn't that holding that lightsaber feel good? And the power of that, which we haven't gotten a lot of Osha darkness yet, where we had that with her in the butterfly, with the Force butterfly, where she was like, I'm putting the magnifying glass on the ant. I got a little bit of darkness here. But even that point where she had the lightsaber up to his neck, and she's breaking down and crying, you can see that there's something underneath with Osha and why she left the Jedi. She felt like she was a failure. I hope we get a little bit more about that in the next couple episodes. But all of those things, the teaching and the corrupting of all these people has been so great. And even with Soul, him having that connection to the Padawan, him lying to Jecki, oh yeah, I keep those pictures in my wallet for other reasons, not because I'm attached to her, not because I feel these things that we're not supposed to be feeling as Jedi. So I love all of these layers and things that we're getting, attachment and suffering and all these things in the background are fantastic to me. So I'm really loving a lot of that stuff. Shoff, I think in the last episode, you were asking me if the Cortosis was like a Magneto helmet type of thing. And I think we got a confirmation in this episode.
Yeah, he indicates that it's a sensory deprivation tool, and it helps him essentially channel the Force better. As far as somebody else not being able to read your thoughts on the outside in, that's not really explained, but the assumption is that, I guess. I mean,
I think it's interesting.
This is our first real introduction to this type of a metal ore in live action, where it's been established and now created as part of, this is part of the lore now. But but it seems like, based on where his base is, which is not Octu. I mean, it's probably Octu. It might be Octu. It's unknown planet.
It's definitely somewhere in Ireland, Scotland, or Wales, the coast.
Yeah,
I looked it up. They filmed in Wales and Portugal, but they wanted you to think of Octo. They wanted you to think this is the same type of thing, and that that brings up so many things in the background of what if the Sith knew about this place? They were hiding in plain sight because the Jedi had kind of lost this, but that was the place of the first temple, and the Jedi have origins on that island, and so the Sith using that as a home base, that would be great.
And we've sort of
if we got
seen
that.
in the lore, the canon, you know, in the Clone Wars TV show as well as Rebels and stuff, that there's Sith, the Sith Wayfinders and other types of artifacts that are on all these various different planets, which suggests that the Sith, like the Jedi, they had outposts, they had places where they were, or maybe their acolytes did, whatever, you know, because of the power of two. You had sent me in a text, and I'll reference it. I think this comes from Legends. Bal'demnic was an ocean planet. So if you're hanging around that area, located in the Outer Rim territory,
the Oral
sector, maybe could be the Oral sector. I don't know. Just so you know. And just so people know, if you're looking for a vacation spot there, it's extremely harsh climate, discouraged you from visiting. But no, just kidding. It has beautiful giant rock cliffs, pristine beaches, and a vast azure oceans. Photographers are generally hanging out there. Not very fun people to vacation with, xenobiologists and fisher folk. So who are into that, maybe Bal'demnic is for you. But I think the most important note is,
that sounded like a prescription drug commercial. Maybe Bal'demnic.
Maybe Bal'demnic is for you. Talk to your doctor.
Talk to your doctor about it.
Careful for large deposits of cortosis in your system. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes.
But that is actually what the planet is.
Yeah, the cave he's in has that whole, like, whatever you want to call it, cortosis vein. Yeah, that was really cool. I was like, well, now we know where he's getting it from too. Like, that answers that question, which is fun. So,
but one thing to mention real quick, just in the Bal'demnic history, is that Darth Tenebrous and Darth Plagueis were aware of that planet in Legends, and definitely the rich deposits of cortosis. So that Leslie Headland was a fan of Legends. I mean, could Cricinto's character, could we be seeing the birth of either Tenebrous or Plagueis on screen for the first time outside of Legends? It'll be interesting.
I think we're going to get something. And Shoff and I talked about this last week, Kevin. David Harwood, Martian Manhunter himself, was cast, and he still hasn't been seen. We're 6 episodes in, and for them to make that casting announcement and him to be he's not just a background actor. I think he's going to be playing one of those. I just don't know which one. And that planet, Bal'demnic, comes from the Darth Plagueis novel by James Luceno, and that was the planet where Plagueis killed his master, Darth Tenebrous. Plagueis then recruits Palpatine. So that's the line of the Sith from Legends. I don't know what they're going to do on this show, but it's very interesting that they... Do you think they held back the unknown planet? Because they've named every other planet on this show. They must have specifically put unknown because they didn't want people to kind of get that, make that connection too quickly. Maybe they'll reveal it in another episode. But
I kind of view it as, with every other planet reveal, they've always said the planet's name. Like, they've always said it before going there. So, like, they'll talk about, I'm Brendok, and then you'll see Brendok or whatever. Like, we're going to go back to Coruscant. Now we see Coruscant. Like,
so we know as audience.
Yeah. So I think like the fact that they haven't spoken of the planet's name yet leaves it as just being unknown.
That makes sense.
For the time being. But I think partially you're right too, with not wanting to show their cards just yet. So
can I ask a question?
That makes sense.
This is more a canon question. I know we're coming up on time here. Anybody find it weird that Vernestra was having like off the books or on the side, like, political conversations with about Senator Senator Raincroft? I think. By the way, that sounds like an evil dude's name. Raincroft sounds like a Bond villain. Like, I just thought, I picked up on that. I was just like, why is she, not hanging out with the High Council, having these, like, I think there's something there going back to, but is she bad? Is she wheeling and dealing on the side? What's really going on with her? Because again, I made the comment that she was kind of a sub player, but I think she's starting to become an integral player in the show. And again, in our text chain, Vactor, I was basically saying, I think what's going to happen, just kind of reading the tea leaves, she could be the person that sort of covers this whole thing up. Not only is she that authorized the mission and all of this, but like it's all going to blow back on her in a really bad way if it comes out that like she created this dark side user in some way. And so that'll be interesting to see how this all kind of plays out in the next couple episodes.
Yeah.
I definitely want to see that, because I don't think it was an accident that they introduced her, and she was the only one that was in the High Republic that audiences already knew. Although I'm getting a lot of pushback because people are saying in the books and the comics, her character was completely different. Like she was happy, and something happened between then and now that would have changed her character so much. People are like, what could that have been?
Could be that.
And we haven't even,
or losing a Jedi,
we might get that.
So, I mean, look at what it did to Obi-Wan, right? Like, I mean, we saw that.
If we get that in this show, is that going to be disappointing for people who they are still writing the end of the High Republic books right now? They haven't come out yet. So I actually saw somebody online was like, if this spoils the books for me, I'm going to be upset because the show is ahead of where I am in the books. I don't know if that, I'm not reading the High Republic books, so that it doesn't affect me that much, but I can see if I was, maybe that would be something where I'm like, oh, I would have rather found that out in the books first and then come to the show and be like, oh, now I know why she's evil already. But that is interesting, Kevin, no matter what, having whatever she ends up being, I think these political conversations, there's something about them, because even back in one of the episodes where she was talking to Saul and they were talking about the Jedi's political enemies coming out, like, I think there's a reason. That's not just a side thing.
Well, she doesn't want to bring in the masters or the council
at
all. She does not want to talk to them. She doesn't want them aware of the goings on.
Don't tell Yoda.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So like for all of
yeah.
Grapevine, I did.
I think it's 100%. Like there's a reason why we're seeing Vernestra. I wanted to mention real quick, Charles Soule, who Shoff only calls him Soleil, but Charles Soule, who's one of the architects of the High Republic, and he's been writing a ton of great stuff in comics and novels. But he posted in his newsletter, he said, and I wanted to point this out because there's a point in the episode that this happens. Told you Acolyte was cool. Also, on occasion, it's goofy and weird and strangely tuned, like every Star Wars thing ever. Star Wars has room for Andor and Acolyte and Ahsoka and all kinds of other things, all vibrating on their own frequencies, all giving you many things to love, but also maybe some things to bounce off. It's your choice which parts to focus on. I know which one I picked.
Amen.
And
love that.
This episode made me think, I love that take on it, but we've seen goofy stuff throughout this whole thing. Yord steaming like his clothes. Shoff hates the hairdos that we've seen in this, but this is the High Republic, Shoff. Does that mean
they don't know what a comb is? They're all rocking Rod Stewart hairdos, or
High Republic era. This was like the 1985 hairdos.
See how much of my forehead I can show.
Read the Wookiee Cosmo magazine, where what's the new Wookiee character's name? I always forget. Dude, I thought he was rocking a pretty cool, like, tattoo fade kind of buzz thing, like a little bit more of that, in the Wookiee Cosmo stuff they got going on over there.
Yeah.
So the dead Jedi corpses on Kofar. When have we ever seen in a Star Wars property, like literally dead bodies just laying there, like the eyes open of Jecki and the 3 holes in her corpse? Like I was sort of taken aback by that for a minute. I was like, holy mackerel, this is some legit like death and despair going on here. And rest in peace, Jecki. She's great. So
I think the only time maybe was Order 66 when we saw the Jedi going down, but we didn't just see their bodies, decomposing. I think this is the first time that it's been on this scale and this level. But I think it's that yin and that yang of there's like a very dark side to this show, and then there's this goofy side, which that was what I wanted to reference about Charles Soule. Was there's that point where May gets the oil squirted in her face and she's like, and Basil's like running around dancing and he's hugging her leg, and it's like, what is going on this show? What was the point of Basil? Because I thought he was going to be the one to out May of, I smell her. I could smell May over here. And he was going to do that thing in the Force.
Why would May smell like Osha?
I'm still trying to figure out Basil, whatever his name is. Like I'm like there's a part of me that's like, I love this character and I'm glad they brought it in, and it's like unique and it's a very Star Wars thing, like an Ewok or whatever. But it like at the same time, like I'm trying to figure out what is the end game for this little hamster or whatever he is. So
yeah, and that's like, they set him up to be, okay, he has a purpose. He can sniff her out, right? The tracker is the one who called her out originally, but then they set him up to be on the ship, and I'm like, hey, this is the Chekhov's gun. We're setting him up to be, he's going to be the one to out her. But this one, Saul finds out on his own, and it's like, okay, now he's useless. Like, what is the point of him even being there anymore? But maybe it was just to be goofy, I guess. That was just kind of a strange thing to me, but I wanted to point that out, that there's goofy stuff on here, and then there's also dark stuff. So there's a definite balance, but I think people kind of calling out the tone shift a little bit.
Kevin, I wanted to get your take on something real quick before we go. Last week, I theorized that Osha is going to become the Acolyte. And then this week's episode, we saw her don the helmet. She's being seduced by Chimere. And definitely, I mean, by the end of it, she's even breathing hard like Vader, which honestly, that bothered me a little bit, because she just put it on. Like she put it on. She goes, like, come on. I think
the point of that was supposed to show the sensory deprivation of everything else is quiet and you're only hearing your breath. That was the way that I took it.
Yeah, or maybe like a sense of claustrophobia being
that too.
In the mask. But
because I thought you could see through that, and we saw it was like, you really can't see.
Exactly.
Everything is, and you're interpreting it.
Which makes his combat skills even more impressive when you know that he wasn't really seeing anything.
Right.
Out of it.
Everything was the Force.
Yeah.
And I loved what he said about that, the helmet, which I need that helmet now. I love this design and I want it on my shelf. But I love that he was like, the only thing that goes in there is you and the Force and what you take with you. And that's very reminiscent of Luke.
So like if you fart, like your fart's going to end up inside the helmet, and then you're going to smell it.
And also, don't put Basil in the helmet. But I think that was very reminiscent of the cave that Luke goes into, and Yoda's like, only what you take in there is what you're going to go in with. So that reminiscent of previous Star Wars things. It's like poetry.
I think Yoda was just talking about
that too.
Granola bars. So going back to your comment, Shoff, I think first off, I've always suspected Osha will somehow convert to the dark side at the end of this whole thing. I think it's sort of always been set up that way. And
it makes sense.
I wouldn't even say it's a big twist. I think that's just what we've been gearing up for. I mean, Chimere even says in his conversation with Soul there in the lightsaber duel, I want a pupil. And like, he already knows May is not that person. She can't let go of her past. I mean, even a Sith, you have to let go, right? If you remember Kylo Ren in the sequel trilogy, dare I even mention that trilogy, where Snoke is like, you are unbalanced, you're broken, the death of Han Solo has split you to the bone. Like, there's this idea that even to give in to the dark side, you have to let go of some things, and May hasn't gotten there. Whereas I feel like Osha is ripe for what the stranger is wanting in a pupil. And so I think we will see this continued evolution of her dark side of the Force, and maybe she kills this dude. Maybe she becomes this, and we don't know. It's just going to be fascinating. But yes, I like where they're going with this. And I think May dies. I think she's gonna get killed. And there's part of me that honestly thinks maybe Soul might have a little bit of conversion to the dark side here, or he'll sacrifice himself in some way as his way of redeeming whatever occurred in the past. So
I was gonna say, I don't think he's making it back to Coruscant. I think maybe he's going back to Brendok, and there's a confrontation with him and Chimere or something there. But there's a lot of people aren't making it out of this show, I don't think, or this season at least. I did want to point out the next episode Kogonada is directing, who also directed episode 3, which is the flashback episode. So I think we're going to get another flashback from when Soul is telling May, and then when Chimera is telling Osha. I think that's we're going to get those two sides of it. But very interested, like Kevin, to see what's going to happen next. The characters are keeping me engaged. The mystery of what's going on, all of this stuff is fascinating to me, and I hope that you are enjoying it as well. We always love to hear your comments, your feedback, everything here on the channel. Leave a comment down below. Kevin, do you want to plug Fused Film? Tell them what they can enjoy over at Fused Film.
First off, you can follow me at Fused Film across the different social media channels. So look for at Fused Film, FUSED-FILM. You can follow our podcast on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Podcasts. And if you like to watch the videos, you can watch our podcast on YouTube as well. So we're everywhere. We're anywhere. Just right now is obviously the Acolyte, but we have other episodes where we've talked about Marvel, we've talked about DC, we've talked about past Star Wars properties like Ahsoka, what we like to focus on. So we like to fuse all those things together. It's Shoff on an episode coming up soon. Course of Actor as well. That's where you can find us. You can also follow me at thekevincoll.com. You can go to my personal website. You can read about my marketing stuff that I do, as well as some articles that I've written around the Acolyte there as well. So love to talk about this stuff. So thanks for having me.
And Shoff, you will be back next week to talk more Acolyte. We've got shows left, 7 and 8. I can't wait. Thank you both, gentlemen, for joining me. Thank you, viewers, listeners. And until next time, we would be honored if you would join us.
Trust only in the Force.